Just before we start, I'll get right into the book. It's like minus 16 Celsius out here and windy, so I'm crying and shivering, you know what. All right, let's get to it. The Rhylian Raven, Chapter 3. Try me a little bit slower. The fog was so thick the next night that even I was slightly unnerved. But it was perfect weather for a burglary. I was on the job and fully in the moment. Every muffled sound, every subtle movement was part of my awareness. I made my way to the inn with confident, measured, and silent steps. This was what I was born to do. Okay, so that's overstating it a bit. Must be that poet side of me. I mean, I do like the thrill of the chase, but really, it's just making a living. But this time was going to be a little different. I'd gone up against magical wards before, but not actual wizards themselves. Thankfully, the guild kept its own wizards on retainer, and I'd purchased a few tools to help with the job. The rest was on me. In the alley behind the inn, I paused and took stock. All my equipment was in place and checked. My clothing was secure with no loose folds anywhere. I took a few deep, slow breaths and did some stretches. I felt good. I reviewed my ingress and egress plans and contingencies. I also reviewed how I'd search for the Raven. I'd seen a floor plan of the room, but I didn't know exactly where they kept the Raven. That meant serious improvisation. I pulled out a tiny filter of gray liquid and swallowed it in one gulp. This was the first of a few little precautions I bought from one of our helpful wizards. The best way to describe what it did was to make me fuzzy. When inevitably those two woke up and wanted their Raven back, they would use all kinds of magic to figure out where it went and who took it. I didn't want to be on the receiving end of that kind of irritation. So this would make me hard to track. They'd know roughly who and where I was, but not exactly. That should be good enough to keep my skin intact, I hoped. Now, a lot of normal folks think that burglary is all about daring acrobatic exploits involving ropes and superhuman stunts. That simply isn't true. I always look for the easiest way to get in and out. I thought of simply going in through the door, but it would be locked, warded, and noisy. Not practical. My targets were in a second-story room with a small window, though. True, the window would be warded, but getting in and out should be quiet. How to get to the window? My scouting around last night had revealed a stable whose roof put me within 6 feet of the bottom of that window. Okay, there would be a little rope work involved, but nothing superhuman. I could hear the horses inside the stable nickering, and I stayed quiet to not upset them. Along one of the walls was a barrel upon which I could reach the eave of the shingled roof. I grabbed the ledge and pulled myself up. Carefully, I made my way across the wooden shingles, mindful of any rotted or noisy wood. I had to backtrack a couple of times, but I eventually got to the point across from the window. From my pocket, I dug out a small clear crystal. This was another little tool my wizard colleague had procured for me, at no small expense, I might add. Holding it up to my eye, I could see faint green lines around the window casement, indicating magical wards. These wards would alert those inside of any unwanted entry. They weren't too much of a problem. They didn't extend much past the casement or out from the wall. I could bypass them in good time if I didn't trip them while getting close. Now came the tricky part. I unfurled a rope with a padded grapple and began swinging it in ever-increasing circles. I let the grapple fly, aiming for a spot on the roof, somewhat above the window. It made a muffled thud as it landed, and I stayed still for a moment to make sure it hadn't been heard. When nothing happened, I pulled on the rope slowly until the hooks caught. I made the other end of the rope fast to a nearby chimney on the stable roof. I now had my bridge to the window. I had a small waist harness that attached to the rope, allowing me to work in place with my hands free. I tested my weight against the rope, which bent significantly, but acceptably. Slowly I advanced the harness up the rope, pulling myself up hand over hand. My feet dangled over the drop between the stable and the inn, and I could barely see the dark ground in the fog. Good. That meant anyone coming by could barely see me. I stopped as I came up near the casement and made the harness fast in place. The wards would have to be dealt with. For that, I took out a small packet of fine dust. Carefully shaking the dust into my palm, I blew the dust towards the window. It spread out in a diffuse cloud and briefly lit green where it encountered the wards. I looked through the small clear crystal and verified that the green wards had indeed been disarmed. So far, all that money I'd given our wizard had been worth it. I hitched myself closer and went about opening the window latch from outside. This was normal mundane thievery and well inside my skill set. A little patience, a little dexterity, and a little experience resulted in a satisfying tiny snick that was music to my ears. But it wasn't time to celebrate yet. Someone could still be having a sleepless night in there. For this particular problem, I relied on our herbalist friends instead of our wizards. I carefully removed a tube from my jacket that looked for all intents and purposes like a turkey baster. Inelegant maybe, but when I took the plug off the end, I could just insert the tube past the open latch and give the bulb a firm squeeze. Inside was some kind of herbal concoction rendered into a vapor. This was no magical sleep potion. Instead, the concentrated herbs naturally brought about the kind of relaxing good feelings that made sleep inevitable, or kept it going. Since I didn't want to sleep myself, I took my time mid-air outside in the fog, waiting for the brew to take effect and dissipate. Now was finally the moment of truth, the true beginning of the whole operation. I gently pried the window open while looking inside. The occupants had kindly left a candle lit beside their bed, and even more kindly looked fast asleep. I swung a leg in through the sill, peering to avoid any loose objects in my path. Shifting my eyes to the two breathing forms, I further entered their room soundlessly. I closed the window and took a look through my crystal again. I could see the outline of wards around the door, but there was nothing further in the room. I also didn't see any mundane mechanical traps or alarms. So far, so good. I was in. The woman stirred in her sleep, and I froze, ready to jump out the window. The whole wizard thing was making me twitchy. Well, there was nothing for it. I had a room to search, and I had to do it quickly. I started with the cabinet by the window. A lot of the time, a burglary is a crime of opportunity. That is, you know your mark is rich, but you don't know exactly what they have. So there is a certain skill involved in quietly, but thoroughly, searching every nook and cranny in a room or house to see where the valuables are. People are quite inventive, finding little cubby holes and cracks, loose boards and false drawer bottoms. If you rush or aren't fully concentrating, then you will miss something. Since I was looking for one specific item, vice anything of value, this methodology was even more important. The woman kept stirring in her sleep, which I had to admit was not helping my concentration. Nevertheless, I ruled out anything near the window and went across to the closet. They weren't carrying much with them, as the closet was mostly empty. Coat pockets had the usual items, including some coins, which I left alone. I found a ticket voucher for 2 for passage on a ship from Lorivar City to Foltis Kazar, which was interesting, but wasn't the Raven. Even their travel bag had just everyday items that any 2 travelers would have. If you didn't know these 2 were wizards, you would never guess from their belongings. Maybe that was the point. The unavoidable conclusion was that the Raven must be very close to their persons, perhaps even secreted in a pocket of their bedclothes. Gods damn it, this was going to be tricky. I took care of the easier tasks first, hoping to get lucky. I checked under the bed and in and around the mattress. Very carefully, I felt under their pillows for the obvious hiding place, but to no avail. While there, I was struck by how young and comely this pair was, especially the woman. Of course, with wizards, you never could tell. They had magic to keep themselves ageless. Nevertheless, she was strikingly attractive, with her long auburn hair and alabaster complexion. At this point, they both stirred in their sleep, either from me rustling around near them, or the herbal concoction wearing off, or both. It was now or never to finish this job off. I was on the side of the bed of the man, so I began the lightest of searches of his bedclothes underneath the covers. This was very much like slow-motion pickpocketing. He was wearing a standard woolen nightshirt with no visible or hidden pockets, as my inspection discovered. That left the woman. Silently moving to her side, I began searching her. She was only wearing a silken shift, revealing an attractive figure to my hands under the covers. I kept it professional, only touching where necessary to find the Raven, but after a long few minutes I had to relent in frustration, empty-handed. I moved back towards the window, surveying the room once more. Had I missed anything? I didn't think so. Even under the pressure, I had been methodical and had to conclude that the Raven simply wasn't there. It is frustrating when this kind of thing happens, but it does happen. It was time to leave. I went to open the window latch, but strangely it wouldn't budge. I quietly applied as much force as I could, mindful of making a squeak, but to no avail. My puzzlement turned to apprehension as the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned to look back and was startled to see the woman staring at me. "It won't open, thief," she said as her eyes bored into me. I swung my hand back to break the glass, but was held in place with a gesture from her upraised hand. By now her companion was up and coming around the bed. His anger was apparent in his movements, and I would have shaken in fear if I could have moved. "Check to make sure it's still there," she told him, stopping his advance. "Who knows what magic he's purchased? He might have been able to get to it." The wizard gestured to the air in front of him while intoning in a language that made my head hurt. He paused and looked at the witch, who herself said something in that same language. Abruptly, it was like a hole appeared in the air from which light shone out, illuminating the room. He reached into the hole and retrieved a small statue of a raven, showing it to the woman. He replaced it in the hole, then did more wizard stuff. The hole disappeared, and the room was plunged into the faint candlelight again. He walked up to me slowly, with his eyes intent on me. I tried to struggle, but couldn't even blink. "I hate thieves," he murmured into my ear. "Such arrogance, thinking you could trespass unnoticed. Very shortly you are going to wish you had never been born." For all his apparent omniscience, he was at least wrong about that. I already did. Dun dun dun!